Can everyone hear me? Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think this is really a very exciting panel because it touches on the core of the issue at hand today. We've been, since the morning I've been sitting here and we've been going on about the future of the magazine business in the era of digital disruption, right? And we've spoke about all kinds of things. We've spoken about adjacencies. We've spoken about, how to get audiences on board. We've spoken about new business models. But I think for somebody who was, once a magazine journalist and editor before moving over to the dark side, which is the business side, I think the core of the issue is there a way magazines can get reader revenues of the internet? The honest truth is that the experience in India has been pretty mixed, both in terms of the kind of reader revenues you get, not just for magazines, but also for newspapers. I think we have a panel over here where pretty much all the brands that the respective gentlemen run do have some reader revenues which are coming through subscriptions, right? Srini, for example, was a pioneer in many ways, started way back in 2005. I know Anand Caravan as well, and our friends from Europe, little that I heard about your businesses, you guys also charge readers, right? So in some senses, as far as the panel is concerned, one is preaching to the choir, but I think their experiences in terms of why they decided, what the journey has been, what are the difficulties with the journey, may actually inform decisions that some of you may be making about whether to, put your stuff behind a paywall or not, right? So, but, let me just start with a slightly generic question. Is there consensus, at least over here, that we have to, sort of dial up on reader revenues and put as much content as possible where readers pay for it? Or is there still a belief that the ad-supported model in India still has some steam and in the foreseeable future can really create value for the respective brands? I'd like to hear it at least from Srini and Anand first, right? Srini, why don't you go first?
Thanks, Pony. I think it's very clear that if the content is worth paying for, it has to be behind the paywall. But I don't think all the content that every publisher produces is worth going behind the paywall. So there have been, there were instances, there are some checkboxes that you need to figure. The way we do it is that we use content which doesn't go behind the paywall as, the top of the funnel. We use it to attract audiences, because if you don't have content in front of the paywall, then where are you going to get audiences from? And if you're going to open up all the good content behind the paywall to audiences anyway, then it's a bit of a catch-22 situation. So I guess you do have some content which is meant to be read, consumed. You have to cultivate the user. And when you see that the user is spending time, of course, there is also a freemium model that we use. So we do provide paid content in front of the paywall for readers who are serious enough to want to come back for more content. And the moment we start seeing them reading more quality and depth of content, that's where the paywall comes in. And I believe that there has to be a mix between paywall and no paywall. From the advertising point of view, I'll be very clear. I think advertising is still in pennies in digital, and we are actually only getting the absolute, we are at the bottom of the food chain.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I don't think that kind of advertising revenue will work for us. But having said that, I think content, the branded content sometimes works so well that, sometimes we feel that some of our branded content pieces we should put behind the paywall, right? So branded content is a way we actually make money from advertising.
Anand, you want to take that?
So I'll partly echo Srini's comment that it depends on the magazine, the kind of content that you're talking about. Speaking from Caravan's perspective, Paywall for us was an act of desperation. We started the magazine 2010, long-form journalism, narrative writing, heavily, deeply reported, researched article. We publish through most of the lifetime of Caravan. We publish in a month what many other magazines, newspapers publish in a day. In terms of number of pieces. So 30 pieces a month, even now, today, which is what is lesser than many other newspapers publish in a day. We ran the magazine on heavy losses. We tried desperately for advertising in print. We tried to follow whatever Google, Facebook, and the wisdom will tell us, build audience, make money from, whatever ads you can. Nothing worked for us. 2018, we decided to put our content behind a paywall. The biggest resistance was from the Caravan team, and if some of them are here, I would say that still they were, because the biggest concern was who will read our journalism then, because we are not great. Let's be honest, Caravan is not a great paymaster. People were working for the passion of working for the magazine that Caravan is, and they were like, if our article is not going to be read, then what's the point? Our contributors would say that if our article is not going to be read, what's the point? But yet we had no choice, otherwise we couldn't sustain the magazine. So Paywall was really the last act of desperation that, okay, if this doesn't work, the magazine has no future per se. Luckily, it worked beautifully in pandemic years, so much so that now the centering of subscription is more within the journalism, within the editorial team of Caravan than maybe, than I could have ever imagined. To answer your question, it wasn't a decision which was arrived after a lot of deliberation. It was more of an SOS decision. It worked out beautifully well. I don't think so it will work out the same way for many of our other magazines. We publish many other general interest magazines, especially in language space. We are trying to do it, and we are somewhere in the middle. We have had early successes. I think in those magazines, advertising will continue to play a very important role. We can't disregard the role of advertising. In fact, more importantly, we would want advertisers to look at magazine readership not in the same lens as they look at newspapers or digital, which are large audiences with thin attention. Our readership is very engaged. Please value the kind of readership we have in terms of engagement. That's what we are trying to sort of straddle. It's a difficult journey given the large ecosystem, the heavy strong headwinds that you face, where everybody's looking at millions and tens of millions of audiences, and we are presenting few millions or few 100,000 audiences. But we do see an important role for advertising for many other magazines. But for some of the magazines like Caravan, I think it's entirely reader funded now. I don't see that changing in years to come.
But I think the challenge is that you need to, there's a huge shift in mindset, right? Because if you, in some ways about thinking about it, is that I think what many people call the original sin of the internet, right, is that it optimized for the audience economy, right? When the internet first started and everybody started putting stuff out on the web, micropayments and that ecosystem wasn't evolved enough, right? So everybody was actually saying, let's get lots of audiences on board and we will monetize those audiences without realizing that they were actually first walking into, Google's arms and then into Facebook's arms and then into Amazon's arms now and then into everybody else's, right? So, but that mindset hasn't really changed, right? The easiest way in any, I remember at least, when I was building ABP's digital business, there was always this battle between the journalists as well, saying that, boss, why don't we put out some content which will get us, loads of views, right? The marketing guys and the ad sales guys used to love it because it used to help them reach numbers and targets, and right? And it used to take a little bit of time and effort to bring them back and say that, it's very easy to talk about Priyanka Chopra's marriage, right? But everybody's talking about Priyanka Chopra's marriage. So what's the unique value prop that you're putting out there, right? So how does Indian media, I mean, you're saying that it was an act of desperation for you, right? I mean, you clearly called that out. You were perhaps a very early mover, and little that I know about your business, you were looking at the audience abroad and, Bickerton and, how it was easier for them to pay because stuff used to get lost in transit.
It was again desperation for us.
It was desperation for you
we
as
had
well,
to,
right?
We had to make sure that digital
okay, right.
broke
So
even.
fine. So these are acts of desperation. So do you think the industry as a whole has reached that tipping point of desperation where everybody says, let's look at creating great content, doesn't matter if revenues fall, but as an industry, we start building a paywall journey, right? Like you have seen in the US, right? Most of the large players are actually trying to basically claw audience revenues back. I want to go with Nikhil, and then I'm going to go to Jean and Jean. I hope I've got your pronunciation right. Nikhil, do you have a point of view on this?
Yeah, sure, Ronnie. So with regards to the experience at with Mint specifically and at HT, I mean, we're still a print-funded business. 75% of our revenue is generated on the print business. But having said that, the digital business is quite large, and there is a lot of stuff that we publish online to bring in audiences. And then we put some stuff, as I said in my presentation earlier, we produce about 220 articles a day at Mint. Only about 25 of those are designated premium, which means the secret or sort of holy grail, if you will, is knowing which of those 25 to put behind the paywall. And you have to be in sync with your audiences about that. Having said that, I'd also say that it depends on what sort of paywall you've set up. And this could get a bit technical, but I mean, are you doing a hard paywall where you're not letting anybody touch whatever's behind what's marked as premium, or are you doing a metered paywall where you have some fungibility, or a porous sort of paywall? And then now we've got propensity. So we use a tool called Piano, and they have this module inside it called the Composer, where based on your propensity to subscribe to a particular article, looking at your browsing history and your cookie data, it'll decide when to surface the paywall, in your user journey. And we have a mix of that going on at the moment. We have a bit of, I mean, depending on, and we're constantly running experiments on the site because we have a large enough top of the funnel. So with a bunch of, 50% of our users, we're doing propensity. With somebody else, we're doing metered. With a few others, we're doing a few other experiments. So I don't think anybody's cracked that yet. But what I can say is it's bringing in reader revenue on the digital side.
And just to follow up, are you seeing the percentage of revenue shift now? Whatever is Mint's revenue between advertising on the website, right? Let's not look at the newspaper. And subscriber, is reader revenue going up?
Mint as a brand, we do about 25% of our revenue on digital.
No, within digital,
and within
is
digital,
subscriber
we do about
revenue going up?
Yes.
Slowly, is it climbing up?
It is. So within digital, we do about 25% from reader revenue and 75% from advertising.
Just
Up from nothing. I mean, we were a free website. We just were fully advertising dependent. So suddenly we have reader revenue coming in at 25%.
Okay, that's interesting. Do you want to take a crack at this? I mean, just can you give us a sense of, the European markets are a little more evolved, but they too had a history of...
I just want to add that we've been doing this for 3 years now.
Yeah, that's what I meant. So 3 years back, what was it?
In 3 years, we didn't have a paywall. 3 years ago, we didn't have a paywall.
Okay.
Yes, when I'm looking to the European market, and especially in the Netherlands, I think that publishers have been helping shaping the internet by offering a lot of free content during the last decade. And at the moment, what we see is that we need to shift, and that we have to realize that high quality content has to be paid for. And when we are looking to advertising money on a global level, we lost the battle from the big tech. So when we look to the subscription area, then we have to take an example, and by example Netflix or Spotify. And they opened the world also for publishers to, by example, the younger generation, to pay for content, to pay for music, to pay for video and series. So opening up that, we saw in the Netherlands that especially the newspapers opened with a digital subscription strategy. Yesterday evening we were talking about that one of the most common subscription models in the Netherlands is based on digital during the weeks and physical in the weekend, when you have free and you have some more time. And after the newspapers, I think it's now time for business to business to run in the same area.
That's
so
right.
that's why we started in December on this level.
Jan, do you have a point of view on this in terms of the shift towards
Yeah, I was-
putting stuff behind a paywall, getting subscribers to pay?
Yeah, I think, strategy-wise, I think it's just a matter of daring to test it, I think you have a lot of considerations why you shouldn't do it, but why don't you just try it, In the beginning, it's flat anyway. It's like disaster, and then suddenly the numbers are going quite high up because the readers get used to it, and they need a couple of weeks, months to think that, well, I have to unlock this option. And I was thinking about the reporters and how you have to train them. We spent 20 years training them to be obsessed by their click metrics, so now they have to be motivated by something else. And well, that was a good case I had there with 1,400.
Yeah, that's right.
Readers, that's few readers. How could you motivate a journalist to write that story? And of course, you have to share the revenues and the conversion instead of the clicks. And it's surprisingly easy if you dare to do it.
One of the most insightful comments that somebody made, I remember at one of these INMA or IFRA conferences in Washington, was the former editor of the Washington Post, a gentleman called Marty Baron. Right, and he said to the large audience that the front page of Washington Post doesn't define the newspaper anymore, the home page does, right? And all their sort of effort is gone towards, how do you craft that home page of Washington Post? Is that something that you are doing or you are doing for that matter? I mean, is that the shift in terms of approach? Because unless you bring that approach, you won't get the quality which will allow people to pay. Anand?
I think that was the intuitive thinking a few years ago, but practically, I don't think so. Homepage is the most important page because the article page is the most important page.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I think the larger point is the digital offering rather than the print
of course.
offering.
That's but natural. The biggest way anybody discovers any magazine or content is online, through social, through search, and therefore the first thing, when you enter the first article, how that page looks, what are the other articles you see. Again, I think the goalposts keep shifting, or your understanding keeps shifting, because earlier we were trying to see, bombard with a lot of choices of content, when you enter the first page, whatever first page is there, give these choices within the article, right? Also read this, also read this. I mean, we have really done away with a lot of it, and try to focus on clean reading material. That's also because the focus has shifted from making money from advertising to actually giving the reader
value,
as aesthetic experience as you can, as minimalist, as clutter-free.
The other thing that strikes me, and I'm going to open this up again to all of you. Do you think at some level we have spoilt the Indian reader? And I'll tell you where I'm coming from, right? I started my career in business world, and if I were to look at the early 2000s, if you were to look at just the business magazines, if you were to look at Business World, Business Today, Business India, Outlook Business, I guess they would have had, at a conservative level, something like 200 to 300,000 buyers, right? Subscribers plus on stand, right? Consistently buying. You throw in India Today, throw in Outlook, those numbers would have been much, much higher, right? If you were to look at the total number of subscribers, though you could argue that there's a use case that in their print-only avatar, people were willing to pay for that content and buy it week after week. That's number one. Number two is, even if you look at some of the experiments that are happening with Morning Context and Ken, etc., the numbers are nowhere close to the kind of subscriber numbers that were there back in the day, right? So as publishers, as media houses, have we done, have we done disservice to ourselves by giving out too much of content free too early on?
Because you're talking about original sin at some point,
Yeah.
and you said leave the newspapers out.
Yeah.
I think the original sin was by the newspapers, by keeping the cover prices so damn low, 3-4 rupees, making it unviable for magazine from the beginning. I mean, India Today is 75 rupees or 100 rupees today, and a newspaper is 5 rupees. And we had a slide in our presentation right at the beginning where it showed the size of newspaper industry versus magazine industry world over. And in India,
That's right.
India is the only case where the newspaper industry is maybe 15 or 20 times of magazines. That's because newspapers have been so underpriced for whatever reason. I mean, a lot of it is, of course, we can say advertising, government advertising that magazines don't get, and then subsidizes newspapers' price of, physical print paper. And that has sort of transcended on digital, where newspapers have been giving content free, therefore magazines are supposed to give content free. It's changing. I think, yes, of course, readers were spoiled like everywhere else. All over the world, readers were spoiled. But publishers have done it in America and Europe. Enough publishers are doing in India. I think all of us, magazines and newspapers alike, are actively thinking about paywalls. Many of them have implemented paywalls. We're paying for Netflix, we're paying for streaming services, music, content, television channel, which used to be now earlier free. You have to now, in free, you just get a few channels. All the good channels you have to pay. So somewhere the psychology has changed that yes, for any good content you have to pay. I think it's a matter of time that hopefully this enough.
Srini, I think you want to add something to that point,
Yeah,
right?
so I think we'll have to look at the whole paradigm a little differently. In print, people were willing to pay, were willing to subscribe. There was a kind of a call to action. There used to be a time where, I was told that in order to get their hands on Anand Vikatan, they would actually wait in the train stations and the bus stations, at 5 o'clock in the morning. That's where the copies used to come. So on the internet, I think it's slightly different. And India's internet story has, we've been on the internet for 25 years now, and we have seen at least 4 evolutions, right? So first everything was on the desktop. There was no question of pay. There was just some advertising that was coming in. And then when we hit pay, we realized that, the mobile internet was opening up. And mobile is a completely different animal than from, a desktop. So what you spoke about Washington Post and their homepage, much more is attributable to it being a desktop site primarily, and most of the subscriptions coming in from desktop site rather than from the mobile site. And then once the mobile switch happened, I mean today 90% of my content is being consumed on mobile phones.
Yes.
And when social media took off with the YouTubes and the Facebooks of the world, the entire audience started, when so much of content is being pushed on their face, forget us publishers, just so much of content is being pushed on the face. We have to fight against all of them to get subscriptions going. And then Geo came, and then videos started flowing. So we've been facing tsunami after tsunami. At the same time, it's unfortunate that almost till COVID, with all due respects, none of my fellow publishers have, bothered to look at the paywall. And I think it's only post-COVID that there has been a bit of a scramble. And, some of them are actually looking at active ways of getting into payment. And I think more and more publishers start looking at paywall more seriously. And I could say that the paywall ecosystem is your desktop ecosystem, you've got your mobile ecosystem, and then you have your app ecosystem. And for us, for example, 80% of our payments for our subscriptions is coming through our apps. And apps is actually a very, very small part of our ecosystem. But the usage on apps is almost 10 times more than it is on my mobile phone, right? So
Yeah.
it's very, very, the ecosystem has evolved a lot, and you need to learn, and you need to kind of unlearn and kind of relearn, I'm guessing.
Let me ask a slightly different question, right? And this is about, magazines and their sort of role, right? Magazines evolved because, in some senses, the space in newspapers was limited, right? And, you know, magazines, you know, newspapers were defined in terms of column centimeter, right? So whenever you wanted to do anything in depth, yeah, you had to go to magazines, right? You were able to, you know, write 5,000 words, right? A flyer in a newspaper story would not be more than 500 words, okay, 1/10 of that. And that's how, you know, magazines came, right? I mean, the original word of magazine is from some Arabic word, which some magza or something, which means storehouse. I forget what it is, right? Now in the digital era, where space is not a constraint, right? Newspapers, at least the better newspapers around the world, have very, very long reads, right? If you were to look at the platinum standard, which is New York Times, each of their articles, even news articles, just go on and on and on, right? So how do magazines, which was supposed to be classically the long read, compete against newspapers, which are also, you know, playing with long read, which are embedding so, you know, I mean, is a magazine no longer defined in terms of periodicity, and a magazine is merely a state of mind, right? What magazine journalism is more about how you approach an article, or are there certain aspects of the physicality that also can possibly be visible on the digital platform? Do you want to take that, though? I mean, you come from newspaper background, but take a crack at it as an outsider.
I wouldn't really say we're an outsider. I mean, we're a newspaper that's a lot like a magazine. In fact, a lot of people have characterized us as a daily magazine for business readers. And every day in Mint, we publish a 2,000-word article, which is called the Mint Long Story, rather not very creatively named, but it is one of the big drivers of our subscriptions, I can tell you. And a lot of the magazine style journalism that appears in our pages is the beautiful thing about it is it engages users, they find a lot of value in it when they read it, and it tends to be quite timeless or evergreen. Like the long stories that we produce have a shelf life.
Long shelf life, yeah, that's right.
They can be around for like a year or two, and they continue to drive
That's right.
subscriptions. You have a long tail through which you're able to generate reader revenue. So that's been our experience. And frankly, that's also why we've been able to partner with magazines like The Economist or even the Wall Street Journal. A lot of our selections from the journal tend to be the magazine style pieces. So yeah, I think the lines are blurring.
Yeah,
I mean,
so,
it's
and
not
then
so
therefore, if you're a magazine publisher, how do you distinguish yourself? Is it just by brand? Is it by the legacy of the brand? Or you have to try harder? Or you say, listen, at the end of the day, there is a user and he's looking at content. He's not so bothered about whether it's coming from a newspaper or a magazine or whatever it is, right? Those are artificial constructs. Let's just put good content out there.
I just want to say from the point of view of two of our competitors, which you mentioned, the Ken and the Morning Context, which are also essentially digital magazines.
And pretty long reads.
I mean, they're all long reads.
Yeah.
So the nature of their content is very magazine-ish. A lot of their users, from what I understand, go there only once a week or something like that. It's not a very frequent visit, but when they're there, they tend to consume it over a long duration, which is how you read a magazine. So I think
Highly engaged audiences. I mean,
yeah, they're engaged.
jargon,
When they're there, they're really with
Yeah.
you. So that's the sort of behavior that we're observing. And I think, those niches, when you think of a magazine mindset, I think it's really to cater to a special interest or a niche. I think that's how we would approach it rather than the classical format as you have in the physicality of it.
Is that how you see it? Is that how you see it?
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. Yeah, we see a lot of new publishers launching new brands now, and it's actually in the blind spot of the big media groups because we're so concerned about brands and especially existing brands. We're not really good at creating new brands, but the new players are. So they're creating 7 at a time in new fields and quickly get profitable because their journalistic approach is online first and it's made for mobile. So I think I wouldn't overthink it though. I think you're more or less right that readers will follow if you're consistent about what you deliver. But it takes some time.
Thank you. I had a question. Yeah.
Yeah, there were two views from my side. First of all, when you are a newspaper or a magazine, we are talking about brands and brands loyalty. So you have to create awareness and loyalty for your brand. From our view, you have to be in contact on a daily basis, 1 time, 2 times. Second one is that a recent survey in the Netherlands said that older people over 40 are reading. Younger people are not reading anymore. They are listening and they are watching. So that means that when you are producing your content, then you have to take care about your audiences and that you have to make the right choice. So when we do a tractor test, similar to the EV test of Jan, normally we were creating the content in 12, 14, 16 pages, similar amounts of hours spent, 4 editors a whole week into the field. Now we are going with the same editors, but we are producing the content twice. 1 time for print, but we are also making videos of every tractor, and that's not a video of snackable content, no, it's our really small documentaries of 10, 12, 15 minutes. And a young reader can read the video, he can watch the video, and then he has the same information as his dad who is reading the article. So our way of producing content is getting different when you compare it to the mind shift of the younger.
I actually had a question for you, because at your presentation you described creating mini communities, right? And the question I had is, what's different when you look at the user as a member of a community versus as just a reader? What changes in the mind of you guys when you say this person, Srini, is a community member, which is your descriptor, as opposed to just a reader? How do you service him differently? What do you give him? What do you give to him, which is very different?
The possibility to interact.
Okay, so which digital does that? Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so our editor-in-chief has an open mind and readers can interact with him. We get offered a lot of prizes from advertisers, free tickets, etc., etc. We give them away to our readers. When we do a survey with our numbers, within 24 hours we have a valuable answer. So the interaction of an engaged community is much higher than when you are just having numbers, you know, a big numbers who are reading. So I think engaged communities and the interaction is important with them.
Anant, I want to just build on this for you. Are building communities in some senses really the holy grail for all magazines? And there is also a business imperative there, because communities also create moats. I mean, some of the most valuable companies in the world, Facebook, LinkedIn, etc., are all communities, right? And if I were to look at your product, for example, I think it attracts a specific kind of reader, right? Because of the way Caravan is. And can you convert that into a community, right, which engages amongst itself without any external stimulus, which is really what a community is?
Yeah, I think, the community was probably, when we look back, an underlying sort of way of describing the magazine readership, maybe not in a very active sense, slightly more passive sense. What digital is enabled is to allow levers to make it far more active. So when I say passive, looking at my own experience of being a reader for, let's say, the New Yorker at one point, which I was, New Yorker readers were a community to themselves.
Yes.
You were a certain kind of a person if you were a reader of New Yorker. You were a certain kind of a person if you were a reader of Economist. In fact, they made campaigns around that I don't read Economist, something like
and
that.
I don't know, that's
They
right.
were, so these were communities which were already existing. They weren't levers to sort of bind them together, but they were in the mind. They were somewhere subliminal. What digital has allowed us is to engage those readers in a far more proactive manner. The community was important in a way because that community was being cherry-picked from a very large ocean of readership. So from a big country of 1 billion people, let's say if a certain magazine was being read by 1 million people, those 1 million people were those kind of readers who believed in those 30 people who brought out that magazine. You're really reposing a certain kind of faith in those people's judgment. You believe in them, and therefore you're sort of part of that diffused community from beginning. And you know, if you see the evolution of magazines over the last 40, 50 years, there was a time of general interest magazines, and now it's the time of special interest magazines. And it's become more and more specialized. Special interest magazines are doing better all over the world. General interest magazines, maybe not so. And maybe the future of GI is slightly more difficult. Special interest, we see, the data shows, are far more resilient. They might be facing difficult times, but they're far more resilient than any other form of media, including newspapers. So I think digital actually is turning out to be, after now the entire peak of try for large readerships, advertising, you know, programmatic advertising, which has not worked out. There is some sanity coming in, and digital is now turning out to be a greater enabler of building up communities, which were otherwise, you know, existing there, but not maybe being channelized in an active way.
Athletic being a great example, right?
Sorry?
Athletic, which New York
Athletic
Times
being,
bought.
yes,
Yeah,
of
I mean,
course,
terrific
yes,
example.
yes.
1.26 million or whatever subscribers. Do you look at
Yeah.
building communities with the...
No, I think I actually beg to differ with most. I mean, I kind of agree with you know, some of the earlier views, but the magazine has always been a community initiative. I can, you know, I remember, you know, even when I hadn't yet joined Vikatan, the kind of most of the jokes that used to be carried in Anand Vikatan were reader-contributed jokes. There used to be short story contests where the readers used to participate. Letters to the editor was some of the most sought-after pages at one point of time. And surveys that we used to conduct. In fact, we've been carrying election contests in our state for about 40 years now. And every election we would put out, you know, which party is going to get how many seats and all that stuff. And we would put out prizes like as early as 40 years back, 50,000 rupees. And we used to have tens of thousands of participants. And, you know, it used to be the day of the post. So what more community engagement would you talk about, even from a general interest perspective? From there, we have now come to a specific interest. So my Pasumai Vikatan is our organic agriculture magazine. You know, from the time when we started 17 years back, today we have IT professionals who have left their jobs, gone back to their hometowns, left their lands fallow for 3 years, started organic the way Pasumai Vikatan has taught them. And they've written to us stories saying that, thank you so much, I've been able to revive the farm that my folks were not able to continue doing. I mean, I think community is everything about what the magazines have always been, be it general interest, be it specific.
But digital allows you to leverage that and herd them together much better. I think that's the... And can you leverage that? I mean,
yeah,
what you
absolutely.
have,
but digital is just another medium.
No, sure,
right?
but
and
it's a
in
more
that,
engaging, it's a more personalized medium, right?
I think there's a lot more that we can do.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. I mean, if your starting point is we already have a community out there, I think the question is how do I engage that community more frequently and more deeply on a regular basis? And that's what digital allows you to do. And that's how you build perhaps a deeper moat. I think he had...
I just want to give you a sort of counterintuitive view on, you know, we've had a lot of physical success in the sense that Mint has had two large events that we do every year. One is the India Investment Summit and the other is the annual banking conclave, both of which happen in Bombay. And for this 16th year running, which happened Jan and just this month, the India Investment Summit last week, it was, you know, it's everybody in town wants to get an invite to come. And there is a certain kind of, you know, person who comes to those events and they love being there. And you can really see the community of readers there. And the journalists go, the editors go, we spend a lot of time just chatting with our guests and invitees, and they give you so much feedback. You know, this article was like this, you guys did this here, you didn't cover this story, you know, it's fantastic. And the physical element of that community coming together is, they are coming there because they read the paper and they're engaged. So it's not only digital, it's the physical coming together is wonderful.
Yeah, but digital is more continuous, I suppose. That's really the point, I mean, at the end of the day. I had another sort of larger question. Do you, and this is just a sort of crystal ball gazing, do you have a sense of how soon, at least for your brands, reader revenue will perhaps come close to advertising revenue?
For Caravan is 90% reader revenue,
Okay, I didn't know that.
it's sustainable. Now,
Oh,
we are
wow.
almost a sustainable magazine.
And what about for you?
Yes, it's the same case with some of our brands, but we have all different kinds of business models, to be honest. Of course, the largest news operations are doing really well on advertising as well.
What about you?
Or digital or physical? Oh, on digital. Yeah, on digital, our reader revenue is 50% and we are sustainable.
His is 25%. And what about yours?
At the moment, also around 25%.
And growing.
And growing, and not with display advertising, but especially with knowledge partners. So they become partner content
That's right.
on our website, and that's the main product, the main proposition, what we see increasing at the moment.
Bonnie, I just wanted to add that we have 50% reader revenue, almost 20.
Wow, that's interesting. So great. So I think the picture is pretty encouraging. I mean, if I were to at least look at the fellow members of the panel, right?
We're still looking at very small
Small
examples.
number,
I mean, you know,
of course.
when,
I
when,
mean,
when we look
the
at other
industry, yeah,
magazines,
that's
the
right.
picture is very
It's
different.
Very different, yeah. That's what I said, right? This is preaching to the choir, but you know, I hope this has been instructive for the others who are maybe struggling to make up their minds about whether to, you know, press the accelerator on getting more money from readers and subscribers. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for a great session. Thank you.